Well, I'm Tony Trehey. It almost feels like I should have been in the last session because I am actually a professional exhibition maker. And I'm also a poet, so hopefully that might add a little bit to my comments about how to work with text. I'm not an academic, so there's not an academic bone in the body of this presentation. And being in a room of so many academics is actually making me feel a little bit rebelliously dysfunctional. So, I originally, and I think it says in the notes, I've set off, as a curator and someone who works a lot with text, it crossed my mind, how would I curate Wordsworth if he was alive? And so the thread of this sort of has that in it, but then because I'm used to working with artists, especially who work with find innovative ways to interpret language, it occurred to me that you might actually not have seen that. So there's a second thread that's going along, which is just showing you examples of things that I think are interesting. And then the third thread, which will just randomly trip in, is that I have a really short attention span, so I might lose interest in both of those threads and think of something else. Okay, the Text Festival is a thing I actually sort of started in 2005. I was an art curator working with a lot of international artists and projects, and I was also completely separate from that, a poet, and ran these two separate careers. So I was known in sort of international poetry circles as a poet and as a curator outside. And then one day I was actually having a conversation with Lawrence Weiner, who is called one of the father of conceptual art, and he uses exclusively language in his artworks. And in the same week I was speaking to an American poet called Ron Silliman, and I realised I just had the same conversation with both of them, and they hadn't spoken to each other recently. I think they spoke to each other in the 70s, obviously. But and it just occurred to me, I wonder what will happen if I do put these two people in the same room together. And so that was the genesis of the Text Festival. Originally, it was just to see what happens when you actually initiate a dialogue between poets and artists who use language. Over the years, it actually has expanded to what happens when you put any artist who works with language in the same room with each other. And so it's to an extent now, it's actually dropped the notion of an art form, and it's all to do with how people use language. So it can be sound artists, multimedia, poets, sculptors. We've had 3 text festivals. We've just opened another one which opened in Finland last weekend, and we're hoping to do one in Shanghai next year. And so the next one in England will be in 2014. But anyway, you can have the next slide. This is actually the first time I've done this talk where I've thought I probably don't need to explain what they are, because usually I have to go through the things. Essentially, having asked the question, what will happen? What is the connection in contemporary practice across art forms using language? It seemed to me, as the curator, you would at least have to attempt to frame it in some way. Otherwise, they're just all going to have a drink and a chat and go home. So. This is probably not as deep as all you academics would think, but this was the conceptual framework that I essentially offered up. It wasn't definitive, and every time I present it, I suggest to the audience that if anyone can think of any I've missed, that would advance the discussion greatly. The only thing that I presume I don't need to explain those. The thing that's essentially those are the things that unify contemporary textual practice in the arts. And it struck me yesterday, the colleague who was talking about Eliot referred frequently to her resistance or desire for irregularity within the rules of poetry. And actually there are whole swathes of movements that are driven by creating rules in contemporary practice. Shall we do the next? And similar but rejecting the comment earlier about the way a professional curator might use people's flows through space or sight lines to add additional meaning. This photograph is slightly misleading. It's actually from the very first exhibition, and because this way of looking at art was so new, I actually curated it so that is called the canon, and basically I created a bookcase which featured all the work, all the influential books, which essentially established the point we were at. The thing you can't really see from this photograph, because the photographer has used one of those fancy lenses, is that contrary to encouraging people to flow smoothly and things, I actually broke the rules of curating by there are actually doors either side of this thing, so there's only just the width of a wheelchair to get past it. So actually people were forced to confront the canon before they saw any of the exhibition. That is what you're supposed to do, but what the heck. So next one. We tend to actually take some aspect of the work to inform how it's displayed. This was a solo show of a London-based poet called Bob Cobbing, and he'd actually only recently died, and he's essentially the leading British concrete poet of the 50s. And he was also one of the first people to use photocopiers to create artworks. And so his work is endless. He produced thousands of books himself, and they are frequently of very low quality and stuff like that. But it was very much for him about the volume and the speed of production. So we actually curated it so that the exhibition space was completely packed with stuff in a quite chaotic sort of way, because that's how he was. Can we have the next one? There's a whole the festival. There are actually so many things going on in international text that we've had many exhibitions of different sort of aspects of it. This one was one that was in 2011. Again, there's actually a much bigger room. The thing that's interested me about international visual poetry, of which these are examples, is that there's something strange about the dynamic of the way visual poetry has gone, which is about how prolific the artists are. Virtually all of them design on screens, and actually it makes them very quick. So they are endlessly prolific and endlessly in communication with each other across the net. So the way I curated this was actually to jumble them all together, to show that, because essentially, although you won't be able to see it, but I can see there are all sorts of different national styles going on there. There's Hungarians, there's Americans, there's Turks. And there are the only labels in the whole space are those two little ones at the bottom there, and they just describe the video pieces that are on the wall. That is one of my things, that it seems to me that if you're going to put text on the wall, then you can't put labels up, because otherwise you're asking people to read rather a lot. Can I take the next one?